Okay, so let's get started. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I'm Nick Weininger. I'm an engineer on the Google Custom Search team, and I'm going to be talking about advanced custom search configuration. So I'll start out by giving a very brief background on what custom search is. In a nutshell, the idea of custom search is to bring the quality and the reliability and the speed of Google search results to search boxes on sites all over the web. And what that means to you as a site owner, as a webmaster, as a developer, is that it enables you to create a contextual search experience that's right for your audience. You can define the scope over which you want your search box to search, whether that be just your site or a collection of hundreds or thousands of sites or small parts of sites or even a long list of individual URLs. You can customize the way the search works, the ranking and the navigational experience that your users have. And you can present results with a configurable look and feel so that you can integrate that search better with your site. And finally, you can monetize that custom search by displaying relevant ads through AdSense. And what you may not know is that custom search can do all of this in a very sophisticated way as a developer platform. You may have seen the web-based configurator that we have for custom search engines, but you may not know that we also have APIs that allow you to programmatically create custom search engines and to tweak very considerably both the ranking and the content and the appearance of search results to create a search experience that's very tightly integrated into your site. And to give you an example, here is the search on the New York Times website. It doesn't look immediately like a Google custom search. You couldn't tell immediately, oh, these must be Google search results. And that's because the New York Times has used our APIs and a good deal of their own data to create a search experience that makes sense for New York Times users. So I'm going to talk about the key tools that custom search provides for doing things like that. I'm going to describe the XML format that defines a custom search engine. I'm going to talk about the ways in which you can programmatically create CSEs, either by uploading them to our servers or by defining them on the fly by files that you host on your servers, or even by provisioning them on behalf of others. And I'm going to talk about some of the more advanced presentation options that you have, including some that we've just released in the last few weeks that allow you to include rich structured metadata in your search results, to present your search results using the new custom search element that DeWitt mentioned in his keynote presentation, and to use server-side XML even to configure your results using what's known as Google Site Search. So, as always, we should start with an example. And as always, we should motivate the example by doing something familiar and easy. So I'm going to do something familiar and easy. I'm going to create a new Google custom search engine. I'm going to call it the CSE.io demo. I'm going to say, man, this is a cool demo. I have to decide just one thing in the simplest version. What sites do I want to search? Let's say, for instance, I want to search code.google.com. And I click Next. And my search engine exists. I can try out a query and get relevant results from code.google.com. Now, when I finish, I go to the Web Control Panel. And if I click through on that control panel, I see a whole bunch of options, various tabs which I can use to configure graphically, wizardly, various features of the custom search engine. But this is an advanced custom search configuration talk, so I'm going to go straight to the Advanced tab. And here I see a couple of things. I see stuff about annotations and context. And I might say, I wonder what exactly these things are. Well, I can view this in the browser. I'm going to view the XML for this context in the browser. And I have this annotations things too. Not quite sure what that is, so I'm going to view them both in the browser. Now I look at these, and what do I see? I see, aha, I have an ID string for my custom search engine. There's a creator ID here, and I see the title and the description that I put in the wizard. I see this background label thing that I may not understand, but that I can at least associate with the ID of my created custom search engine. And I see a look and feel section that I haven't configured yet because this is a very simple, very easy custom search engine. And then I go to the annotations, and I see, aha, now here I start to see the sites that I put in. I have code.google.com, and it's labeled with this label that refers back to the custom search engine ID that I saw in this context. And so that's the heart of it. That's the heart of what we do to enable developers to programmatically create custom search engines. We simply define this XML format, which is just the same XML format that we use under the hood and that gets modified when you modify custom search engines in the graphical wizard. And that custom search engine takes sites and relates them to a sort of a frame called a context. And those sites and the context together define the operation of your search engine. So to say in a little more detail what this means, the context tells you about the basic settings for the custom search engine. It tells you in particular what you can do if you create refinements for faceted search. So you may want your search engine to have options to drill down into different parts of your site, for example, so that your users can navigate your search by doing a little browsing and not just by entering keywords. And refinements allow you to do that. It also allows you to do custom things to queries. For instance, you might have synonyms which make sense only in the context of your domain of search. You can define those in the context. And so we see an example here where we have a refinement label that's going to correspond to a refinement link with the title lectures. And those lectures are going to be boosted with a certain weight. And they're going to cause the query to be rewritten in a certain way. And now you see this background label thing. What that means is simply the background label is the label that defines the custom search engine. It's the label such that any annotations which I define over any sets of URLs or URL patterns can be hooked in to the custom search engine, included in its scope by labeling them with that label. And so if I look at the annotations for this sample CSE, I can see, aha, I've included this, I've included a couple of different URL patterns and a couple of different ones of my labels, so I've hooked them in to my CSE in a couple of different ways. Now that's sort of the classic custom search engine feature. I want to also call out a new feature that we just released a couple of weeks ago called promotions. And what promotions are they're completely custom results. And you'll see an example in some screenshots later on, which you can define simply by saying, OK, for thus and such a query, I want this kind of result to show. I want a result with this link and that URL and this little text snippet to show. And I can even include a thumbnail image. And the promotions, like everything else about the CSE, are defined in an XML format. And it's a very simple XML format. Each promotion says what queries it should display on, what title it should show, what URL it should show, and so on. And if I don't want to interact with the control panel, if I don't want to manually upload and download these XML files in order to create or to modify my custom search engine, all I have to do is use our RESTful URL patterns to do these creations and modifications. And you can see the full list of RESTful URL patterns in the custom search engine developer docs, but they're pretty simple. To create a new CSE context, there's just this URL pattern with CSE in it, and you create it with the CSE ID. The one other thing worth mentioning, though, is that there are a number of advanced features which are available, at least for now, only in the XML API, and which you might not notice, therefore, if you've been creating custom search engines with the wizard. I mentioned one at the beginning. You can create user-defined synonyms. Another is that you can boost and demote different sites with different weights. So suppose you have a custom search engine that searches over 10 different sites, and you want to say, I want to tweak the ranking as follows. I want this site to be strongly boosted relative to other results, and I want this other site to be mildly demoted relative to other results, because I think site 1 is really good and site 2 is sort of slightly bad. You can configure that in the XML using labels and annotations. You can even force results to come from a certain site whenever they're available by specifying what are known as top-end results. You can affect ranking in a number of other ways. For instance, you can bias results by date. The New York Times site search actually uses this to enable you to get recent news articles. And as I said, there's this custom search developer guide which documents fully all of these things which you can do. So there's our API. There's the basis of it. But now we have this thing called linked CSEs. And the reason we created linked CSEs was as follows. People said to us, well, I don't want to have to interact with this control panel at all, and I don't want to have to interact with this Google account at all that I used to create my CSE. Because in this example, you'll note I had to go through a Google account in order to log into the control panel and do the wizard operations. I want to be able to handle a CSE as an object which is totally independent from any Google account membership that I might have. And the reason is that I want to define my CSE on the fly. I have some data about what sites are good and what sites are bad. I have some data about how my users want a search experience to look, and that data is changing all the time. And I don't want to have to push an update to Google every time I change the definition of my search engine. I want Google to come to me and get that definition. So a linked CSE enables you to do just that. The way you define it is you write out the definition of a CSE in that same XML format I just showed you. You host it at some URL on your site, and then in your search box, you tweak the URL of the search command just a little to point to that URL. And the semantics of that is, Google, go get this search engine definition file right when the user queries it, parse it out into a definition of the custom search engine, and give the user a search on that custom search engine, which I've just defined. And if the contents of that file changes, change the search engine automatically for me. And the power of this is not only that you can refresh it on demand. The power of it is, number one, that you can make the contents of that custom search engine logically dependent on something else. The first great use case we had for this was, suppose I have a site that's a directory of links, and I'm constantly modifying that, adding sites to the directory, deleting them from the directory. And I want to search, which is just search all the sites in this directory. So the way I want to create the custom search engine at any one time is I want to scrape that page, and I want to take all the links on it, and I want to say, oh, OK, all the sites that this links to, those are the sites that are included in the search. So with a linked CSE, you can easily do that. And the other thing that it empowers you to do is to create on the fly very, very large numbers of different custom search engines with different annotations for different sections of a site, for different individual pages, for whatever different applications you may have. So let's see a couple of examples of this. One of our biggest users of linked CSEs is About.com. About.com is a site which provides encyclopedic information on thousands and thousands of different topics. And for each one of those topics, they have a sort of sub-site. There's classiccars.about.com. There's a politics site at about.com. There are sites for every special interest you can think of. And every one of those needs its own search experience. Because if you're on classiccars.about.com and you go and you search on carburetor or Corvette for that matter, you want search results that reflect your interest in that particular vertical. And so what about.com does is they dynamically create a custom search engine definition for every single vertical that changes as their vertical changes. And so here's a screenshot of custom web results on the studenttravelAbout.com site. And you'll notice, again, I'll talk more about this later, that the look and feel of those results is very much customized to the look and feel of About.com. And in this case, they've done that using server-side XML results and their own rendering. Another example, the Blogger gadget, which we just today moved from draft to live status, just launched on Blogger today. And what this is a dynamic CSE for searching your blog and the context of your blog. Because again, suppose you have a blog and it links to lots of other blogs. It's linked to lots of other articles you found interesting, and you have a blog roll with perhaps 100 other blogs that you like. That is a logical set of information over which your blog's readers should be able to search. And that set of information gets updated all the time. And you want the search engine to automatically update whenever you update your blog in a way that changes that set. And so Blogger, using linked CSEs, provides a feature that does exactly that. And to give you an example of what this looks like and some of the power that it uses, here is the XML source for a custom search engine definition on one particular blog. It includes here an URL of a special format. Notice the make annotations in that URL. What this is the tool that I talked about before. It goes on a page, it extracts all the links from that page, and it makes annotations out of all of them to say, these are all sites I want included in my custom search engine. It includes all of those. It adds a couple of actual blogs manually to the example. And then it defines a custom search engine, again, just as in the prior example, with a title and a description and a refinement facet and some labels. And that all shows up within the context of the blog as a customized search experience over that particular blog. And in this case, we're using another very powerful, very configurable rendering method, namely the Ajax API, which I will also talk about more. One other thing I want to mention in terms of the APIs for provisioning custom search engines. The examples I gave with the control panel, uploading and downloading those XML files, those are all examples of creating CSEs on your own behalf, on behalf of your own account. But we also have an API that allows you to programmatically create a custom search engine on behalf of another. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, suppose you have a business where you have clients who host some content on your site. And you manage that business, that client relationship, through Google Apps for your domain. So you have programmatically created Google Apps accounts in a Google Apps domain for them. And you know by virtue of what content they have uploaded what their custom search experience should look like. And you want to set it up for them without requiring them to do any work. But you want to set it up in a way such that they own it under their account so that if they want to modify it later, they can. So this is exactly what our provisioning API does. It's part of a suite of tools that do provisioning things like this called Google Services for Websites. And that suite of tools includes other things like submission of sitemaps, so that when your clients, again, upload content to your site, you can submit URLs on their behalf to be indexed by Google. And here's an example of one hoster that is using this. It's a web hosting company called Fat Cow. And it has just a whole suite of tools that enable its clients, with a push of the button, to add site search automatically under their accounts. So that's how you can create and tweak the definitions of a search engine as a developer. What can you do to change the presentation? Well, again, one very recently launched thing that I want to highlight is our support for structured metadata. The idea is that if you have structured data on your page, then in a custom search engine that searches over pages like that, you may very well want to include that structured data in the result block. And if we parse and index that metadata, we can return it to you in a format that allows you to do just that. Customize your results so that they don't look like plain vanilla Google results. They have the content that matters to your users, to your audience, to your domain. And we support several different formats for encoding that structured data on your site. There's a format called pagemaps. We support several popular microformats, and there's an RDFa parser coming soon as well. And if you provide data on your site in any of these formats, we will index it for you. And using these XML and soon the AJAX presentation methods that I mentioned, you can return it and display it in your CSE. And the return format is extremely simple. In XML results, in this example, it's essentially just a dictionary of name-value pairs. So your interpretation of the structured data is up to you. You can render it how you choose. But we just provide it to you as we've seen it, as we've parsed it, and you take it from there. Another thing, great new thing, launched just today, is the custom search element. And this allows a combination of ease of use and configurability that I think is really a great step forward. It allows you to do full UI styling with CSS on the client side. It includes special CSE features, like those refinements that I talked about, like those promotions. It includes the ability to monetize with AdSense ads. And you can configure a custom search element very easily based on any existing custom search engine you've created. Now, DeWitt in his keynote gave an example of something that's even easier. You don't even need a custom search engine set up to configure an element. You just copy and paste a slice of code onto your page, and we automatically make one for you. But if you have created one, if you have tweaked and specialized your custom search engine to be exactly the way you want, how do you get the element? Well, if you go back to this control panel here, and you look at my search engines, you see a handy little link that says Custom Search Element. And you click on that, and it looks just like the zero configuration example from this morning, except in the snippet of code, if you look closely, there is this one parameter, and that one parameter is the ID of the custom search engine you've created. And this will work with any of the APIs that I've talked about so far. It will work with custom search engines you've programmatically created on your own behalf or on others' behalf. It will work with linked CSEs. Any CSE has some ID. You put that ID into the code snippet. You drop the custom search element on your site, and it works. And a couple of screenshots here. There's a Macworld example where you've got ads here with all sorts of refinements showing up as tabs. And here is the example which showed the keynote, with it coexisting with a number of other elements on the page. And note this completely custom result here, this promotion with a custom link and a custom snippet and a custom thumbnail icon, all specified by the user. And finally, there is this option to get XML results. And the way you get XML results is that you use a version of our product called Google Site Search. And this has a flat fee pricing model starting at $100 a year for certain chunks of queries and page limits. And it basically allows you to take that XML on the server side and do whatever you want with it. You can mash it up with other content. You can reorder the results. You can configure the look and feel to match your site. You can display it without ads if you choose. And we have a whole bunch of sites. Again, eHealth Insurance is an example of a site using Google Site Search. and they have a custom result here and a number of refinements. So again, this is an advanced user that uses these features to create a sophisticated search experience tailored to their user audience. And so to summarize, these are the various features of the presentation options. We offer just standard HTML rendered for you, displayed in a separate page or an iframe, or you can do a custom search element, or with the Google Site Search product, you can get XML results. And for the next part of this presentation, I'd like to invite up on stage a couple of folks from Adobe, one of our largest site search partners, which has used site search in some very innovative ways to serve their customers, and they'll talk a little bit about how they do that.
Thanks a lot, Nick. My name is Mark Nickerson. I'm a product manager for community help at Adobe Systems. I'm just being a product manager in a room full of developers, I'm going to be really brief and invite my colleague in just a moment, Joel Brandt, who's going to talk about some of the more exciting work that we're doing. But Nick in particular wanted me to talk a little bit about our use case of the CSE. So we've been using custom search as part of a service called Community Help for about a year now. And it's something that we launched with the last round of Creative Suite, the Creative Suite 4. Our use case is a little bit unique in that one of the things that we've been really trying to do over the last year and a half, 2 years, is really embrace some of the new content community models that have been enabled via Web 2.0 and find out how to best leverage those models within the context of help and support with our products. So one of the great things about Adobe is that our customers are just incredibly passionate. So people love Photoshop. They love blogging about Photoshop. They love writing tips about Photoshop. And they love helping each other. That's very visible to anyone who's visited our product forums, things like that, or anybody who's been a part of our developer community. And so really, for us, the real challenge that we were trying to solve was how do we bring all this great wealth of community content, I call it sort of the community ecosystem, how do we bring that all directly into the user experience when somebody's actually working in one of our applications and has a problem? So how do we, it's a tremendous aggregation problem, really. And at the end of the day, working with Google, search became a really natural, really simple metaphor for solving that entire problem. So we partnered with Google about a year ago, and we use, a lot of the features that we use are the ones that Nick described. So we actually use the XML results. For us, that's incredibly important because, Adobe, the brand and experience of our products is very, very important to our users. So being able to maintain that consistent brand experience when somebody's working directly inside Photoshop and then taking them to, a branded experience, maintaining that is incredibly important. We also really appreciated that it was a hosted solution, that it wasn't anything that we were going to have to really, keep up with from a development perspective. Let's let Google do all the heavy lifting, and for us, that was really important. So one of the key things that we did with custom search in the CS4 timeframe was we actually integrated it in with the products. So if you open up Dreamweaver CS4 or Illustrator CS4 right now, you'll find actually a little search widget that's embedded in the application itself. And what that search widget is doing is it's going out and sending via an API call to our custom search engine and bringing those community results directly back into the user experience. So right now we have about 2,400 community URLs included in our custom search engine. This has been a very successful service for our customers. We're doing some data analysis on that right now. I'm sure Nick and Rajat would be very curious to see the data, and I'll definitely be sharing it with them as soon as possible. And that data is definitely going to be influencing how we are thinking about custom search going forward. So right now, as I said, if you open up any Creative Suite 4 product, if you're a developer working with Flex or Air or Cold Fusion, you'll come across some of these community help search results. So I'm going to invite up Joel Brandt, who's going to tell you about some of the exciting things that his team has been working on and some of the success that they've been building upon with the custom search engine.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm Joel Brandt. I'm a researcher at Adobe and also a PhD candidate at Stanford. And I want to talk briefly about another tool we're building called Blueprint. And if you like what you see in this talk, you can come visit us at the Developer Sandbox and take it for a spin. So the work we're doing right now was motivated by a really simple observation. Programmers use the web a lot. In fact, we ran a recent study, and in this study, we were looking at how people learn to use new libraries. In that study, over 33% of the code these people produced over several months was lines of code that were taken from the web and modified. So what's really crazy about that is that despite the fact that programming languages are designed to be read by computers, and our development tools don't know anything about the fact that, we're using the web to produce this code. And our web browsers and search engines don't know anything about the rest of the code we've written. Our editor simply thinks we're typing everything we write. So our idea was, can we leverage Google Custom Search to bring search inside the development environment? So Blueprint is a tool that explores this idea. And let me give you a quick demo of that, and then we can talk about how it works. So in Blueprint is built as a plugin for Adobe's Flex Builder, which is a development environment for Flex and Flash applications. A lot of times programmers are in situations where here they have some code that they want to visualize. In this case, they want to put it in a chart. And creating a chart's very easy to do, but it takes about 20 lines of code, and it's probably not code you can write from scratch. So it'd be great if you could initiate a search for example code that would help you learn how to do that right from your development environment. In fact, that's what Blueprint allows you to do. You can hit a quick hotkey to bring up a search box that's sort of like autocomplete. You can type natural language into this, something like bar chart. And that presents you with results that present example code first. So this is an example of us customizing the search results. Here we present the example code immediately, and you can scroll through this to see running examples of that code. Once you select some code you like, perhaps after performing another search, you can immediately put that code into your development environment. A few modifications to that code, and very quickly you have something up and running. So how is Blueprint built? As I mentioned, we're leveraging the Google Custom Search suite of tools. But in order to do that custom work of presenting examples themselves rather than the entirety of the web pages, we have to build on top of Google Custom Search. So there's three components in what you saw here today. There's the Blueprint client, which is what lives inside Flex Builder. There's the Blueprint server, which sits on Adobe's infrastructure that sits on top of the Google Custom Search engine. When a user makes a query, we gather contextual information from their programming environment, so the versions of frameworks they're using, things that are in scope, and so forth, and send that along with the query. Our server uses that information to augment the query and produce a better query to send off to Google. We then send that search off to Google and get back a set of results. We parse these pages that come back from Google for the actual examples and running code, and then we send those back to the user. So this is all well and good. Now you know how it works, but is this actually effective? So we ran a laboratory study to get at answering this question, to see if we were really benefiting by sitting on top of Google Custom Search results and providing this tool to users. So first, we found that participants found code twice as fast, which is a big step in producing the code quickly. In fact, if you look at the ranking of all 20 participants, you see that the majority of those here presented in blue boxes that were using Blueprint fell toward the fast end of the spectrum. But even more importantly than writing the code quickly, they wrote significantly better code. And this is even more striking. As you see, almost all of the people who used Blueprint were on the side where they produced the best code. We think this is probably because we're able to present the search results in a very customized manner that helps them evaluate code quickly. So in one of the tasks, the best results didn't have a very good standard Google result snippet, and so they normally wouldn't click on that page. But because we were extracting the code specifically and they were to evaluate that code rather than the English on the page, they were able to select a great example and get a really good result. So we just launched Blueprint as a plugin that you can download for free at labs.adobe.com today. So I'd love it if you could all take a look at that if you do Flex development. And with that, I'll pass things back to Nick to conclude. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Joel. I don't have a lot more to say after that, other than that's a really great and innovative use of search in a context where I never would have thought it could be used. I want to call out one thing. something you might think about as developers, I think the feature of contextually rewriting the query based on what they know about the user's context that they're searching within a particular product and so forth is really powerful. We provide a number of hooks to allow you to do this, and I think you should consider, as search designers, the extent to which your users can benefit from this, because it's a really great thing to do. And Adobe is an example of one of our largest partners, but we have a very, very long list of partners. In fact, we recently passed, well, not so recently anymore, passed quite a while ago, 1 million registered CSEs. And we're still growing fast, and we'd love to have your custom searches hosted on our platform, and so that users all across the web can get better search. So thank you, and I'll take questions. Any questions? Yes.
So, hey.
Whoa. Wow. You happen to be
Shouldn't
Mike.
still be Mike. So, let's say I've got a sort of a website that I don't want indexed in the regular standard Google results.
Right.
So I have, let's say, a robot.txt file that says don't index this Google. Is
Right.
that still something that I can use in Google's custom search engines or Google Site Search?
So currently, the answer to that is no, because the custom search index follows the same crawling rules, and well, ultimately, mostly the custom search index just is the Google search index. We do have some extensions to it. As you know, you can submit sitemaps to be indexed in a special CSE indexing tier. But even that index respects the same robots.txt crawling rules as any other Google crawl. So, but it's a good question. We should think about whether to do that.
You mentioned something about AJAX APIs, and I didn't see it.
So the custom search element that I discussed is built on the AJAX Search API. And the full power of the underlying Search API is available in that element. That's what AJAX refers to.
If I have a custom content site and it gets crawled by Google every 2 or 3 days,
Sure.
and right now I have my own custom search, if I want to use your engine, can newer content somehow be indexed more frequently, or how do you approach that?
Yes. In fact, we have a feature designed to help you do just that. It is called on-demand indexing. And the way that it works is if you've submitted sitemaps already to Webmaster Tools, you can pick one of those sitemaps as containing your freshest and highest priority pages. And you can actually go and click, or there's also an API that you can issue a request to that says, index this now. And we will, again, use our special custom search indexing capabilities to go out and recrawl those pages and index them again within 24 hours. So you can at least get that increase in speed and freshness.
So Google keeps almost everything that's crawled, but occasionally we know that stuff falls out of the Google index. If we have a CSE, is there anything that says that our content that's in the CSE will be somehow more sticky? Well, again, this is what our custom search specific indexing capabilities are designed for. You can submit sitemaps to Webmaster Tools, and we either can implicitly, automatically learn that those sitemaps are included in your CSE, or in the on-demand indexing feature I described, you can actually explicitly tell us this sitemap is for my CSE. And when we go and do those on-demand crawls, those pages will be, as you say, sticky. And you said for the XML results, prices starting at $100.
Yes.
Okay. Then what?
So
what's a real range?
Okay. So there are a number of different pricing tiers. Based on 2 factors. Number 1 is the number of pages that you want to include in your custom search, and number 2 is the number of queries you want per year. I think the sort of online tiers go up to about 2,000 and something, 2,250 a year, which gives you up to 100,000 pages and 500,000 queries a year. The $100 a year level gives you, I think, 1,000 pages and 250,000 queries a year. And if you have needs for site search over a really large corpus or with a really high traffic level, then you can contact one of our sales representatives.
I have a question about, I think it's great that you guys are like indexing the microformat stuff. Is there a way you can search against that? So if you want to say, put an author, in as a micro, as a V card or H card, as they call it, I guess, in the microformat standard. Is there a way you can sort of search against that?
You mean to filter the search or to re-rank the search based on structured data?
Yeah, like, so if I want to say, search a website full of documents and I just want to search by author or something.
That's a very good question. The answer is stay tuned. We're working on it. So actually, Rajat, our product manager, is here and is more qualified to speak to that than I am.
I don't know about more qualified, but I can take a shot at it. So in terms of service, so as I said, as Nick mentioned, there are various offerings. There's the online offering where you basically get the vanilla product and you're off and running. We also announced Elements today. So that's another kind of turnkey kind of thing, which is you take it and go. The terms of service there are typically, what the online terms of service are. When you license site search, or if you're a direct partner and you're actually driving a huge amount of traffic, there are typically special relationships we have with our partners. And in some of those cases, there are special sort of agreements that we have with those partners. At that point, there's a lot more flexibility. So, for example, site search customers like Adobe, they have special sort of contracts with Google, and we have a lot more sort of control. In general, site search customers have a lot more branding controls because that's one of the requirements of the enterprise sort of offering. But in general, the online customers go with the online terms of service, which we typically don't kind of negotiate on a one-by-one basis. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and so that's unique to Google logo.
Absolutely. So on the online version, you need to use the custom search branding, and there are various options there as well. So you can actually choose the one that works for you. You can still customize it in terms of look and feel and colors and stuff like that, so it doesn't kind of so it matches up with the rest of your site. But you absolutely need to use the custom search branding, and typically online customers use ads as well. So monetization with ads is on by default. And site search customers have the option to turn off ads.
Hi.
I was just wondering if you could speak to, we'd all love to have all of our content indexed by Google, but in those cases where we can't or it isn't indexed, the search appliance and integration between custom search and the search appliances, if there's any pending future thing where you could have results coming from a search appliance that show up in the custom search results as well?
That's an interesting question. We understand that, yes, there are cases where you don't have all your content indexed by Google. We have, as I've mentioned for a couple of prior questioners, we have these features based on CSE associations with sitemaps and on-demand indexing designed to improve coverage of your content specifically for customers of custom search engine. If even, I recommend that you try those and see if they do what you need. If even those don't do what you need, please let us know why, because we want to make sure that wherever possible we do manage to get in all the content in any given custom search engine. And as to your specific question of search appliance and custom search engine integration, you don't have anything like that now, but it's an interesting possibility.
There is some federation that they built on the appliance.
Yes, Rajat has an additional comment on this.
So in terms of actually getting custom search results into your appliance in the intranet, I think there have been some widgets and federated capabilities that have been built so that if you, for example, are using the appliance in your intranet and you also have a custom search engine for your website, you are able to basically pull those results in because they use the standard XML formats that the appliance uses and honors. So you can actually have federation where you can actually bring those external results into your intranet. But the reverse is typically not done.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. I thank Rajat for the reminder. If you're familiar with the appliance in particular, there's this API called the Enterprise One-Box API that allows you to integrate many other kinds of content into Google Search Appliance search results. And one of the kinds that you could integrate into it would be custom search results. So you could do the combination that you're looking for that way. Correct. So just to say again, there is an API at the appliance level that would allow you to take appliance-rendered search results and include in those results from a hosted by Google custom search engine. But we don't have the capability yet to go the other way, to have a custom search engine's hosted results include results from a GSA. Other questions? Well, okay. If there are no other questions, then thank you all very much for coming.